house of God.
From the 18,000 people who belong to his church in San Antonio, Texas,
John Hagee
to the 99 million homes he says tune into his weekly radio and television broadcast, John Hagee has built an empire sharing the gospel of Israel with evangelicals around the world.
of Jesus Christ.
And as the leader of Kufan, his power extends from the pulpit to politics.
John Hagee is a blasphemous false teacher who teaches that Jesus Christ did not come to this earth to be the Messiah.
In defense of Israel will shape Christian theology. It scripturally proves that the Jewish people as a whole did not reject Jesus as Messiah. It will also prove that Jesus did not come to earth to be the Messiah. It will prove that there was a Calvary conspiracy between Rome, the high priest, and Herod to execute Jesus as an insurrectionist too dangerous to live. Since Jesus refused by word and deed to claim to be Messiah, how can the Jews be blamed for rejecting what was never offered? Read it in this shocking expose in defense of Israel. This latest book by Pastor John Hagee is destined to generate lively discussions among Christians the world over.
John Hagee is not an independent Baptist nor a King James Bible believer. And so a lot of guys that watch this documentary will say, well, that's not our guys. All right, well, how about Sam Gipp, who just about a year ago preached in a church in Idaho and said, and I can almost quote it word for word, you know what I never call Jesus? I never call him my Messiah.
You know what I never call Jesus Christ? I never call him my Messiah. You know why? I say, oh, he's a Messiah. He's your Messiah. Unless you're a Jew, he's not your Messiah. Are you from Gentile stock? All right, we were never promised a Messiah.
I'm sorry, but Sam Gipp is wrong. And he might be popular even among independent Baptists, but that's wrong. Whether it's Sam Gipp or Peter Ruckman or whoever it is, the Word of God is the Word of God. And we don't allow, whether it's Schofield or John Hagee or our favorite preacher, our favorite professor or teacher, to influence what the Word actually says. Jesus Christ is the Messiah. He's my Messiah. He's everyone's Messiah.
Hagee goes on to say in the Houston Chronicle article, many Christian theologians are anti-Semitic because they say the covenant with the Jews is gone, that the Jews have been replaced by Christianity, and that Israel does not deserve American military and financial support. Not only do Christian Zionists like Hagee teach that Christians must support Israel, they also demand that the U.S. government support Israel militarily and financially. And because evangelical Christians make up a large part of the voting populace, politicians dutifully make the trip to Israel to pray to the Jewish God at the Wailing Wall.
There's a lot of socially conservative, evangelical, Republican voters who care a lot about this issue. And if they can see Ted Cruz coming out on Fox News and saying, you know, I am 100% behind Israel, when they see that happening, a lot of conservative voters are going to say, hey, this Cruz guy is better than I thought.
In fact, they just had the Christians United for Israel event, which is an organization of evangelical Christians that are very, very pro-Israel. This is an image, I think we have this, of Rand Paul praying with them. This is there it is. He's praying with the QV folks.
Let me say this. Those who hate Israel hate America. And those who hate Jews hate Christians. So opposition to Israel is opposition to God. And I don't care what they believe and where they're at on the spiritual timeline, because it's not my problem. I have his back. And it doesn't matter what he does or where he's at. But as long as he calls upon the name of Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's my brother.
There's going to be, I think, a turn towards a more biblical Christianity, a more Jewish Christianity. And the lines between us, it was like, oh, those are Christians, those are Jews, are going to be like, oh, those are sort of like those are our brothers.
Israel is grateful for the support of America's people and of America's presidents, from Harry Truman to Barack Obama.
In fact, I am proud to say that no U.S. administration has done more in support of Israel's security than ours. None. Don't let anybody else tell you otherwise. It is a fact.
We recognize Israel's right to defend itself and that it is right for America to stand with you.
Therefore, it is time for America to embrace the words of Senator Joseph Lieberman and consider a military preemptive strike against Iran to prevent a nuclear holocaust in Israel and a nuclear attack in America.
In 2 Chronicles 19, a godly king by the name of Jehoshaphat was going to help Israel militarily. Here's what God told him in verse 2. And Jehu, the son of Hanani the seer, went out to meet him and said to the king Jehoshaphat, shouldest thou help the ungodly and love them that hate the Lord? Therefore is wrath upon thee from before the Lord. So we're told today that if we support the nation of Israel, we're going to be blessed by God because of Genesis 12. When in reality, the Bible teaches that if we help an ungodly and wicked nation like Israel, we'll have God's wrath upon us. Today,
why should we, as Bible-believing Christians, support the nation of Israel when the nation of Israel won't even allow a Christian to immigrate to their country? If you want to immigrate to Israel, you have to renounce the name of Jesus Christ.
So for someone to become an Orthodox Jew or have the right of return, they have to renounce Christianity, for example.
They do.
You can't be a Jew and a Christian. It's one or the other.
So with regard to the modern state of Israel, it requires the renunciation of one's former religious affiliation. It requires a number of rituals that are designed to cleanse one of their prior religious affiliation.
Someone who's not a Jew doesn't just automatically have an invitation to immigrate to Israel.
Not as a citizen.
Not as a citizen.
Correct.
So in order to be able to immigrate to Israel, they would have to renounce Christianity in order
to become a citizen.
And
they'd have to be converted by an Orthodox rabbi.
I personally know men who have gone over to Israel believing that Israel is the promised land and that the Jews are God's chosen people, and they go there with that in their hearts, and they go there to witness to them and tell them about Christ. But it is illegal in Israel to pass out tracts. The cops will come and harass them, and even being under the threat of arrest or deportation. The Bible is true when it tells us that they are the enemies of the gospel. Romans 11:28, as concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sakes. But as touching the election, they are beloved for the Father's sake. It says it right there in the Word of God. They are the enemy of the gospel.
In June of 2014, during Gay Pride Month, the United States Embassy flew the American flag, and underneath the American flag, they hoisted the Gay Pride flag. And for the last few years now, Tel Aviv has been voted the #1 gay city in the world amongst the gay community themselves. They have voted Tel Aviv as the #1 place in the world. Not San Francisco, not New York, but Tel Aviv.
We were established for the establishment of Israel. Our markings are all over. Take out $1 out of your pocket. Look at the Great Seal. You'll notice in between the wingspan of the eagle, you will see the Star of David, made out of 13 stars. Now, why is the Star of David there?
Around that star is the Shekinah glory cloudburst, symbolizing the Shekinah glory that was over the tabernacle. George Washington said, I want that to be on the dollar so that people will recognize the contribution that the Jewish people have made to the United States of America.
Not only are today's Christians being taught to be pro-Jewish and pro-Israel, the strange doctrines of the Talmud and the Kabbalah are also creeping into churches and being taught as Christian doctrine. For example, many pastors will use the term Shekinah as if it was something from the Hebrew Old Testament, when in reality, the word is never found in the Bible one time.
So the Shekinah refers to the divine presence.
And it's a feminine word, by the way, not masculine.
For example, Leon had come out and said, I have an idea. God is a woman. That might not have gone over so well. But now he was saying that the ancient Rabbi Shimon was teaching us about Shekhinah, the feminine half of God, and her romance with her divine partner, the Holy One, blessed be He.
So there is a belief that God could be both male and female.
The Shekhinah is the indwelling presence of God in the universe. It's what emanates from the being of God. But for Jews, Shekhinah and God are one and the same, and it is almost forbidden to separate.
Okay.
God simply manifests himself or herself in the form of the inspiration of the Shekhinah.
Shekinah is something that's part of the Talmud, something that's part of Judaism, not Christianity. And yet, how many Baptist preachers have used that phrase, Shekinah glory, in church, and it's not even scriptural?
Friends, we need to grasp this, that the Shekinah glory is in us. This presence that we talked about, this presence that came in this upper room to the disciples, this Shekinah glory is in us as believers.
The Bible is clear from Genesis to Revelation that God is a he, not a she. And to teach that God is both a he and a she, you've got a different God. The Christian Bible teaches that man was made in the image of God. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, the Bible says that a man ought not to cover his head for as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. So according to 1 Corinthians 11, man is not to cover his head because man is in the image of God as opposed to woman. That's why even in Genesis 1:27 it says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. They were created rather than godly edifying, which is in faith, so do. Now in Titus he just said avoid genealogy. But here he says to avoid endless genealogies. Now I'm going to show you why genealogies are endless. They truly are endless. This is what a family tree looks like. Now, at the bottom of this family tree, we just have one person, which is you. Now, you descend from two people, don't you? Your mother and your father. So if we go back one generation, you come from two people as a direct descendant, right? But if we go back another generation, you don't just have two grandparents, you have four grandparents. And it keeps doubling, doesn't it? Because you have two parents, four grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, and you have 32 great-great-great-grandparents. That means if I were going to do a family tree that went back 5 generations, I would have to have a piece of paper wide enough to where at the top of that paper I'd be able to have 32 people's names, wouldn't I? Because that's how many ancestors I'm going to have directly in that 5th generation. Now, if I went to the 6th generation, my paper is going to have to be twice as wide because now I'm going to have 64 slots to put in names, right? Well, what happens, though, is that as we go back further, this number gets really big. Now, in order to understand how this chart works, we have to understand how long a generation is. How long is the average generation?
Well, they say 20 to 25 years.
Okay. Now, a generation has nothing to do with lifespan. For example, my mother was 30 years old when she gave birth to me, and women generally give birth between the ages of 20 and 40. So let's just take 30 as an average. 30 is a nice round number, and 30 is a very conservative number for
Some consider Darren Sproles too small for the NFL. Truth is, there's a whole lot of oomph to every ounce. A concentrated power people respect. That's why Darren trusts Tide Pods. Because he knows small can pack a punch. Small but powerful. Tide Pods.
Hey, what's up, guys? God's here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. Just
just wanted to report on a story that came out. Study finds that children raised Christian or Muslim are less altruistic, and a bunch of different news outlets picked this up. And basically, the biggest one, probably The Guardian, suggesting religious children are meaner than their secular counterparts, study finds. And basically, the study is of nearly 1,200 children between the ages of 5 and 12 between US, Canada, China, Jordan, Turkey, and South Africa. Almost 24% were Christian, 43% Muslim, and then 27.6% non-religious, with the rest of it being Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, Gnostic, which didn't really affect the study claimed by these scientists here doing the research. So let me read for you just a brief portion here of this article. The children were asked to choose stickers and then told they were not enough to go around for all children in their school to see if they would share. They were also shown film of children pushing and bumping one another to gauge their responses. The findings, quote, robustly demonstrate that children from households identifying as either one of the two major religions, Christianity and Islam, were less altruistic than children from non-religious households. Other children, usually those with a longer exposure to religion, exhibited the greatest negative relations. The study also finds that religiosity affects children's punitive tendencies. Children from religious households frequently appear to be more judgmental of others' actions, it said. And I actually read the official report, and one of the biggest problems I see right from the get-go is that they're under this assumption that children that are raised in Christian homes are more moral than people that are not. And that's a false statement there. That's not something that is promoted by Christians or anything like that. I guess some Christians do, but I know that irrational Christian will never say that, because we all know that human beings are fallen, they're in sin, Christian or non-Christian, it doesn't matter. So it's really a faulty premise to begin with. But there's an article by William M. Briggs called Here's Why That Study Claiming Religious Kids Are Less Altruistic Stinks. This is published today. And let me just read this for you because it's fairly short. It says here, heard about that scientific study which scientifically shows non-religious kids are scientifically more altruistic than unscientific religious kids? The Guardian summarized it thusly. Quote, religious children are meaner than their secular counterparts, study finds. Religious beliefs appear to have negative influence on children's altruism and judgments of others' action, even as parents see them as more empathetic. Scientifically speaking, this is crap. Here's why. The scientific science study The Guardian cites is a peer-reviewed article, The Negative Association Between Religiousness and Children's Altruism Across the World, in the journal Current Biology by Gene Desity and a bunch of others. Biology? Never mind. And you see the problem right from the get-go that he's pointing out here, which is that the field of biology should not be able to speak into moral or philosophical dispositions such as altruism. But in any case, he continues here. Authors gathered kids 5 to 12 from the US, Canada, China, Georgia, Turkey, and South Africa and asked them a bunch of scientific questions, scientifically quantified those questions, produced scientific statistics, and then made scientific propositions about the whole of the human race. Say, are there differences in behavior between 5 and 12-year-olds? That doesn't sound like a scientific question, so never mind. Here's how you can replicate their study at home. First, define altruism. Go on, I'll wait. Have a definition in mind? I'm sure it's correct and matches everybody else's definition in precise detail. Details like no greater love, supreme sacrifice, kindness, patience, love, and so on, right? Well, maybe not, but never mind. Instead, think about how you would quantify your definitions. Quantification makes your definition scientific. Science means unquestionable truth. Was your answer about quantification a dictator game? Like this, from the supplementary description. Children was shown a set of 30 stickers and told to choose their 10 favorite. They were then told these stickers are yours to keep. Children were instructed that the experimenter did not have the time to play this game with all of the children in the school, so not everyone will be able to receive stickers. Children were finally shown a set of envelopes and informed that they could give some of their stickers to another child who would not be able to play this game by putting them in one envelope, and they could put the stickers they want to keep in another envelope. Experimenters turned around during the child's choice, and children were instructed to inform the experimenter when they were finished. Altruism was calculated as the number of stickers shared out of 10. Yes, this scientifically captures every possible nuance of the scientific concept of altruism, doesn't it? Science, 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 science. It must be science. Scientists wrote this, peer scientists reviewed it, and scientists nod sagely when reading it. But one thing ironic that I think a lot of these research projects do is they always lie to children to try to get some sort of ruse out of them. And this is consistent with other research projects that have come from this scientific point of view, trying to prove certain things about kids. And so it's ironic that they would be immoral in their process of measuring a moral ethic. Getting back to the
Jesus
article
Christ.
Here. Now, define religiosity for kids. I'll wait again. Have it? Haha, that was a trick question. The author never assessed the religiosity of kids. They did it for the kids' caregivers instead. How? The authors asked parents to name their religion. They also asked parents questions like, how often do you experience the divine in your everyday life? They took pseudo-quantified answers from these and combined them scientifically with a quantification of religious attendance and derived a complete scientific quantification of religiosity. This was assigned to each kid in the study. After that, children completed a moral sensitivity task programmed in E-Prime 2.0 and presented on ASUS T101MT touchscreen computers. My goodness, how scientific. An ASUS T101MT. Just think how dramatically the result might have changed had they used a ASUS ROG G752 or an Acer C910 C37P. You know what happened next? We p-values through the terrible abuse of regression on the pseudo-quantified answers. A picture showing one of these is at the top. Notice the we p-values. That makes the findings scientific. All those dots are the answers to the pseudo-quantification for each kid. The flat surface is the regression, expressing this and nothing else, the change in the central parameter of the normal distribution representing uncertainty and altruism. Did you think that it was something different? Notice almost none of these dots are near this flat surface. That means this model has no real predictive value, which, scientifically speaking, means this study is crap, and where I use science in the old-fashioned pre-government grant way. Finally, no paper would be complete without wild, overreaching theorizing about cause. The authors say their findings, quote, contradict the common sense and popular assumption that children from religious households are more altruistic and kind towards others, end quote. Idiots everywhere are taking this literally. I'm too tired to make a joke about science. You do it. The study is so bad that it's good. I mean, it stinks to high heaven. Nearly everything is wrong with it, start to finish. Yet it's good because it takes so much effort to dissect, and the effort reduces the critic to such a sputtering mess that the criticism is bound to sound like an old fart yelling at the kids to get off the lawn. Why I am right. Update. P-values are rotten evidence for anything. 2. Regression is deeply flawed and not what you think. 3. Probability models do not prove cause. 4. Asinine studies like this are common. And most importantly, don't throw a temper tantrum and, for you men, cry like a little girl or say that I am a bad person. Show exactly where I'm wrong and the author's right. If you cannot do this, keep your mouth shut. I'm too tired and too surly this morning to put this more politely. So he goes after this study pretty hard. And who is this guy, William M. Briggs? Well, he's a statistician, an adjunct professor of statistics at Cornell. And so, when he's looking at p-values and, all this stuff, he knows what he's talking about. He also has a PhD in mathematical statistics, though he's now a data philosopher, epistemologist, and probability puzzler, unmasker of over-certainty, and self-awarded bioethicist. Well, in any case, regardless of his credentials, he doesn't have any kind of religious dog in the fight. And he's saying that this, quote, scientific finding is garbage. And, just in the logic of this, I read this whole report thing, and you can tell that there's so many presuppositions there and jumps to conclusions that it's really hard to believe that this is science. At the very least, with the integrity of science, and I would even imagine people that are, pure science people would look at this and say, wow, this is a weak experiment to show this sort of cause or alleged cause and suggest that, because of the 1,200 sample size of children 5 to 12, the way they quantified altruism and the way they quantified religiosity, and they came to this huge conclusion that, takes the headlines, religious children are meaner than their secular counterparts. If this doesn't smell agenda, I don't know what does. So I just wanted to point that out. And then also, you got to remember that this whole study was funded by the John Templeton Foundation. And John Templeton is, there's information that he's a Christian. He passed away in 2008, and now this foundation is being upheld by his son. But there's plenty of articles that suggest that the John Templeton Foundation is not really Christian or religious in that sense, and they've stripped their sort of religious or even Christian, more specifically, agenda behind their foundation, and they're more looking towards funding, the more philanthropic areas in life. And especially when you look at this, they look at mathematical, life sciences, human sciences, philosophy and theology. And one of the areas where they push is genetics. It says here the foundation takes a particular interest in how major advances in genetics might serve to empower individuals, leading to spiritually beneficial social and cultural changes. So there you have it. There's a deeper agenda going on here, and there's some stuff that ties Sir John Templeton to Freemasons and stuff, but I'm not going to really dig into it here. Just know that there are some smatterings of that out there, and no surprise with certain people like this. And this might be a topic that I really do want to cover, is this idea of religion being used as a weapon, or at least Christianity especially being used as a weapon. Sir John Templeton quoted as saying, "There is a great need for both scientists and theologians to be open to the spiritual significance of new discoveries in the sciences." And I agree with that statement. At the same time, I don't know that his goals here or his intentions are being upheld, especially after his death. So there you have it. What do you think? Do you think this study from Current Biology is legit? I don't think so. I think there's way too many assumptions. They're jumping to conclusions on a lot of this stuff. So many more variables to altruism, to religiosity, to everything. I don't even want to get started. There's so much more variables than all this, and they've tried to simplify it with these p-values and create a chart out of it. And again, it's just a continued agenda to paint anyone who has a religious affiliation. And I think it's becoming more clear that Christians are being melded into the Muslims here. The whole West thinks that Islam or Muslim is a violent, radical religion. And of course, the extremists in that sense are, and I certainly don't agree with the Islamic worldview at all. But at the same time, extremism can happen in any form. And what I think they're trying to do is continue to push this agenda that violent extremists are anyone who is religious. And that's the agenda, with scientific, quote-unquote, studies to show that confirmation bias. So I'll link to all the stuff here. Check it out for yourselves. Let me know what you think. Hope you have an awesome day. God bless.
Come on, fuck. That's crazy. Wait, what the fuck is going on?
Hey, what's up, guys? Gonz here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. Haven't done a CERN watch in a while, and I always say that. And if you're watching on the playlist, you'll hear successive videos of me starting the video saying, I haven't done a CERN watch in a while. And I know a lot of you are wondering when I'm going to have Anthony Patch back on, and I've been in communication with him, and so we'll definitely bring him back on either on here or on Canary Cry Radio. We've had a couple schedule conflicts. He's busy doing other things also, and our schedules just haven't been able to converge, but I know that it will happen as the Lord wills. And so just keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, I do want to talk about a few things here. Just the news coming straight out of CERN. There's been very little about the proton run, which they completed, and now they're moving into the heavy ion program. I know some channels are doing a better job of tracking the exact data coming out, but I guess we won't know exactly all the data or all the ramifications, at least coming from the mouth of CERN. And that doesn't mean that they're not lying to us or keeping things covered. Obviously, they would keep things under wraps, and there's no way for us to truly know what kind of things are happening. with some of these tests. But what I've noticed with many of the updates coming out of CERN is this idea of CERN and Large Hadron Collider and the whole thing moving into global sectors. And what I mean by that is that they are starting to have their influence in society in a way that is more public, if that makes any sense. For example, on the 20th of October, CERN and NUSTAR, the Spanish Science Industry Association, signed agreement to support businesses in developing CERN technologies. Then you have the Port Hackathon pushes humanitarian technology forward, where they took 134 participants from 42 different countries, divide them into 13 teams, and they tackle different humanitarian issues, and they have 60 hours to figure out how to solve them. And this was conducted at CERN, and one of the more interesting things that they put together was this low-cost spherical incubator for rural hospitals in developing countries. And, that would be helpful, of course. And other things that came out, new CERN program to develop network between Sesame schools. And we've talked about Sesame in the past. We've talked about the LHC luminosity upgrade, witch hunt nearing end at CERN, which is kind of a play on the Halloween season. But then on the 3rd of November, CERN speaks at UN about laboratories' cooperation model. And it says here at the United Nations in Geneva yesterday, which was back in November 3rd, CERN representatives discussed their laboratories' model for international cooperation in science for peace. Then on the 10th, CERN DG to become member of EC Science Advisory Group. LHC arrives in Singapore, upgraded nuclear physics facility startups. And then today, CERN and research institutes discuss energy sustainability. Sustainability, does that sound familiar? It goes back to the whole 2030 agenda and the whole sustainable development agenda. And it's interesting that we saw those terror attacks, and it might be connected because what they're trying to create is peace under one governance. And interestingly enough, if you go to the Sustainable Development's website, it says here under the peace category, we are determined to foster peaceful, just, and inclusive societies which are free from fear and violence. It's the perfect Hegelian dialectic to cause violence before a conference held by the UN, right? There can be no sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. Okay, it's a little circular there. But it's interesting that one of the things that came out of the whole Paris thing was that peace symbol that went viral. And then again, the climate conference happening just in a couple weeks in Paris, France. And why is that important? Well, the CERN website themselves published an opinion piece by Frederick Bordry. And in this article, it talks about the climate conference. The organization of the COP21 climate conference in Paris in December cannot fail to remind us how important the issue of energy is for our society. Over the last few years, many research organizations like CERN have joined the debate and began to look at what we ourselves can do to save or recover energy and thus improve our energy management. As a collective, we have already learned a lot together, and I believe it is essential that we continue to share our experiences in order to improve our practices. The terms energy efficiency and sustainable development should not frighten our institutes. On the contrary, this endeavor is a chance to improve our tools and processes and should offer us new economic, technological, and social opportunities. Our scientific institutions have proven their ingenuity in the development of innovative strategies and technologies for research. And as experts in vacuum, superconductivity, cryogenic technologies, we have at our disposal numerous tools and skills that should enable us to make progress and develop technologies that benefit our infrastructures as well as perhaps society and humanity too. Energy transport, storage and optimization, waste energy recovery. There are many new things for us to invent. Although we still have some way to go, I am delighted to see that since the first workshop 4 years ago, many people and organizations have joined us in this now global debate, and that many organizations, including CERN, have appointed an energy coordinator. In any case, the fact that we are all starting to come together around this topic is an encouraging sign, and the discussions at the third workshop, Energy for Sustainable Science at Research Infrastructures at DESI, set us on the right track for good progress in the future. So there you have it. The connection here with CERN, climate change, Paris, France, terror attacks. There's a lot to chew on here. And based on some of my research, and I know the opinion of many out there, there is already free energy. Tesla already figured out how to tap into the ether and the natural resources of energy. And we know part of the story is that the United States government hijacked Tesla, and many technologies were developed from that. And we have quotes from people like Douglas MacArthur who suggested those things, like weather modification for one, which ties back to this climate change thing. Now, interestingly enough, though, with Tesla, if you dig into some of his claims about the electronic voice phenomenon and the drama that unfolded between Tesla and Edison, it's pretty fascinating because, according to some, Edison was trying to create a spirit communication machine, what people today are familiar with as EVP and stuff like that. Well, Edison was trying to find those things. Tesla, using his technology, was already hearing things from the radio signals that he was tapping into, and he believed that they were just beings from other planets. Now, Edison mocked Tesla publicly about his experiments, but allegedly, Edison privately believed that Tesla had managed to find the correct frequency to enable communication with the spirits of the dead or the spirit realm. And part of his goal was to create that spirit phone and put it on the market. But again, Tesla basically thought that it wasn't spirits, it was just beings from other planets that he was hearing. So while we sort of put Tesla on a pedestal of a guy that was silenced, and he certainly was silenced, and I'm not going to deny that, to make him out to be some sort of great martyr, I think, is also a little hasty, because he also was communicating with these spirits, if you will, or whatever it was, and some have even speculated that he was receiving some sort of communication from elsewhere just to begin with, when he started tinkering with electricity to tap into that ether energy. So perhaps he was actually channeling spirit entities, and the government, if you will, hijacked it so that they can use it for their own means. But in any case, I just wanted to end this video with a couple pieces of scripture, because I feel that while technologies will increase and while communication systems will increase, and there's going to be a lot of positive things to come out of that, eventually I do think that it will be hijacked by the enemy, as it always does. And there's a reason why there are scriptures like this in 2 Peter 3, verse 10 and 11. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also, and the works that are therein shall be burned up. God's going to completely burn up this form of creation. And so it really goes back to Matthew 16:21. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? I think a lot of these technologies that will be a part of this global
Stay there, Bubba. Where's that bone? Is that yours still? Do you want it? Get it. Is that your bone? Huh? Do you want your bone? Do you want it, puppy? Do you want that goosey? Is that your bookies? Is that your bookies? Get it. Come here. Don't keep me. Come here. Come here, goose. It's okay. It's okay, Bubba. Come here. You go, goosey. I'm not gonna take your bone, Bubba. I got that for you. Yay! I got that for you, Bubba.
System are eventually going to try to take your soul away in terms of you as being an image bearer of God, a human being that is redeemable. I think Satan's goal is to eliminate humanity in a way where mankind can no longer be redeemable through the blood of Christ. That's his ultimate goal. That's why transhumanism is happening. That's why the flood of Noah happened and the whole Genesis 6 event of creating hybrids. But God is going to judge it righteously in the end. So let me know your thoughts about some of this. I know a lot of you have opinions about Tesla and a lot of CERN information that I may have missed. And I appreciate a lot of you guys when you send information to me. I may not always respond to you immediately, but I do try to check out everything unless I had already seen it. So I appreciate that. Keep doing that. Hope you guys have an awesome day. God bless.
Thanks to Schneider Electric, you now have total control of your building's vital systems.
Excuse me, I'm looking for the accounting seminar.
sorry,
I'm just the facility manager.
What? You're just the facility manager? Just the facility manager? Do you not remember what happened in this very building just 6 months ago? So, you still believe you're just the facility manager?
Oh, no. I am the facility manager!
Schneider Tui. Oh, you piece of shit.
Hey, what's up, guys? Gonz here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. President Obama was actually interviewed by Bill Simmons in GQ magazine just recently, and Bill Simmons brought up the idea of conspiracy theories and JFK and everything else. Here's the segment here. Bill Simmons asked, "What's the most entertaining conspiracy theory you ever read about yourself?" Obama answered, "The military exercises we were doing in Texas were designed to begin martial law. so that I could usurp the Constitution and stay in power longer. Anybody who thinks I can get away with telling Michelle I'm going to be president any longer than 8 years does not know my wife. And obviously this refers to Jade Helm 15, playing it off as nothing more than just the drill, and obviously it didn't lead to any kind of martial law system, although with the whole refugee situation that we're in right now, I do think that there was intention behind some of these drills. But in any case, then Bill Simmons asked, have you ever said, give me the JFK assassination files, I want to read them, give me all the secret stuff? President Obama answered, I gotta tell you, it's a little disappointing. People always ask me about Roswell and the aliens and UFOs, and it turns out the stuff going on that's top secret isn't nearly as exciting as you expect. In this day and age, it's not as top secret as you'd think. Now this is kind of a loaded answer. First off, Bill Simmons asked about the JFK assassination files, and what does Obama bring up? Aliens and UFOs. Now you'd think there's nothing to that. It's the whole concept of conspiracy theory. But there's a lecture by Peter Levenda that was from several years ago, Amsterdam 2011, the Secret Space Program Conference. It's one of the most well-known talks on the Secret Space Program that's out there. And in it, Peter Levenda really makes the connection between the UFO or extraterrestrial phenomenon and the JFK assassinations. There is a paper trail there, and it's really interesting, so I recommend you check it out. So that's why when he brings up Roswell, aliens, and the UFOs in response to a question about the JFK assassinations, I think shows a little bit more about what might be really going on, which means that Peter Levenda's lecture here might be more truthful than you'd expect. Now, when he says here, it turns out the stuff going on that's top secret isn't nearly as exciting as you expect, the initial response from me is that, first off, he's admitting there's top secret stuff, which is not surprising. But secondly, he says it isn't nearly as exciting as you expect. And most people would say that, oh, it's more mundane than you would think. And that's the connotation of what he's saying here. But there is the possibility that what he is saying is covering up for the fact that the actual phenomenon is much more disturbing and much more terrifying than you'd expect. And then when he wraps up here, in this day and age, it's not as top secret as you'd think, I think he's really just saying, they're not telling me everything. And I think that's true. I think he knows that he's not being told everything. And what he has been told is probably a little bit more boring, and perhaps even stuff that's already out there publicly by folks like Peter Levenda. And it's just, the dark history of what's happened, and I doubt he is in the loop all the way with what's really happening. So Obama has said stuff in the past about UFOs and joked about it, and he was on Jimmy Kimmel and all this stuff. I do think that most UFO enthusiasts would be pretty disappointed that I doubt he is in, which means that Peter Levenda's lecture here might be more truthful than you'd expect. Now, when he says here, it turns out the stuff going on that's top secret isn't nearly as exciting as you expect, the initial response from me is that, first off, he's admitting there's top secret stuff, which is not surprising. But secondly, he says it isn't nearly as exciting as you expect. And most people would say that, oh, it's more mundane than you would think. And that's the connotation of what
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I'm delighted to be speaking to a new guest today, and we're going to be speaking to author and researcher Mr. Peter Lavenda. While for the show, definitely have him in my sights. Fascinating, interesting topic we're going to talk about today. He's the author of Unholy Alliance and Sinister Forces. He's appeared in the TNT documentary Face of Evil.
God, dude, these commercials are gnarly.
Testing? Yes. Thank you very much for that great introduction, and thank you to the organizers of this event. We have a lot of distinguished speakers today. Of course, Richard Hoagland, as I'm sure you all know, and Richard Golan, Timothy Good, Ed Grimsley. I feel like I'm open the first act, right? But I'll try to make this memorable for you. We're talking about the origins of the secret space program. And I'm going to introduce to you some things of which you're probably already very familiar, and yet in a different way perhaps than you're used to thinking about it. So don't be dismayed if at the beginning this does not seem relevant, because I will show you how and why it is. A seminal event for me in the secret space program began in June of 1947. No, I wasn't around in June of 1947, but historically it was a seminal event. And many of you have heard of the Maury Island affair, a very strange, bizarre incident that took place on the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Shortly after Kenneth Arnold, a pilot, gave us the term flying saucer that month, there was a UFO sighting. In this sighting, UFOs evidently crashed, rained debris down upon some civilians, killed a dog, according to the story, wounded a child, according to the story. And it led to a chain of events that are very, very unusual, and yet are evidence of something that took place 20 years later that shows us there was a deep connection between the UFO story, as it was promulgated back in the 1940s, and very serious political and military events of the next 20, 30 years. So, Maury Island affair, there's a UFO sighting shortly after Kenneth Arnold gave us the famous flying saucer story. And a man that we know as Fred Prisman.
Well, fucking, let's see the audio better.
Claimed that he had been involved.
Let's put some pump into it, huh? Put some grease. Put some elbow grease into it. You got a little pump in your step. You got a little else. Yeah. Oopsie. Sweet Caroline. Dun, dun, dun. Sweet Caroline.
Dude, what the fuck? Play it, bro. God damn it, this pisses me off.
Balance power. This is something. The Expanse. Watch the first episode now on YouTube or tune into the 2-night premiere starting December 14th on Sci-Fi.
That sounds cool, The Expanse.
None of us can change the things we've done, but we can all change what we do next.
All right.
Testing? Yes. Thank you very much for that great introduction, and thank you to the organizers.
All right, let's get to your fucking tiddly.
Rained debris down upon some civilians.
I got it.
The plane crashed, and both of these Air Force officers died. These are probably the first
went a little too far.
United States Army Air Force at the time visited Chrisman and his partner, Mr. Dahl, and retrieved pieces of this so-called debris of the UFO. They got on a plane, the plane crashed, and both of these Air Force officers died. These are probably the first two victims, mortalities associated with the UFO phenomenon. The first two, there were many more since then, as any student of UFO history knows. So Fred Chrisman is this strange guy, you know, strange background. No one knows too much about him. He seems to have been some kind of confidence man, some kind of criminal, a crook, but maybe also an intelligence agent. There is evidence that there were intelligence connections to his background. He was also somebody I like to call a wandering bishop, and I'll get to that story in a minute, because this is a striking aspect of this whole field that people have not covered because they don't understand it. Fred Chrisman, 1947, seminal event in UFO history. He shows up again 20 years later, being investigated by a district attorney, Jim Garrison, in New Orleans, because of his alleged role in the Kennedy assassination. We'll come back to that in a minute. One of the people investigating the Maury Island affair and all of the UFO incidents that were taking place in the Pacific Northwest in 1947, in the months before and after the famous Roswell crash, was this man, FBI Special Agent in Charge, stationed in Butte, Montana. He was in charge of a bunch of files we call the SM-X files, according to the FBI's own documentation. UFO matters were classified as SM-X, security matter-X. These were the original X files. This man's name is Guy Bannister. Guy Bannister is the man who will come up again in our discussion 20 years later as a suspect in the Kennedy assassination. If you saw the movie JFK by Oliver Stone, this was Guy Bannister, the actor playing Guy Bannister. Now we come to another man called Jack Martin. Jack Martin's real name is Edward Suggs. He worked as an investigator for Guy Bannister. He was another bishop. We'll get to that story in a bit. He's probably the same guy as the name that comes up in the files of the Office of Special Investigations of the military as Agent Jack S. Martin, who was investigating UFO incidents in California in 1949. In the movie JFK by Oliver Stone, Jack Lemmon plays Jack Martin. I'm showing you these photographs from the film, so you get a kind of context if you've seen the film. You know that we're talking about real people, real individuals, and their real influence. Of course, Oliver Stone does not go into the UFO aspect of this case. These photographs have never been seen before in public. You're the first people in the entire world that is actually seeing these photographs, because they're photographs that were given to me personally by a man who was involved with Jack Martin. Jack Martin, the Jack Lemmon character in JFK, the man involved, they say, in the Kennedy conspiracy in New Orleans, was also, in addition to being an investigator, in addition to being possibly a man investigating UFO incidents in California, in addition to being heavily involved in the group around Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans in 1963, was also a bishop in a church, in a weird church, in a church that no one had ever heard of before, in a church that even Jim Garrison didn't understand. In his own documentation, in his own writings, going back to the House Select Subcommittee on Assassinations, when the United States government was going through an investigation of the assassinations in the 1970s, Jim Garrison wrote a note, copies of which I have, saying, look into this church stuff because I don't understand it. Well, there's Jack Martin, dressed as a priest in the 1970s after the Kennedy assassination. His friend and associate was David Ferry. David Ferry and Jack Martin both worked for Guy Bannister. David Ferry, former Eastern Airlines pilot, rabid anti-communist, very much involved in anti-communist activities. He's another bishop of the same church as Jack Martin. And of course, he knew Lee Harvey Oswald, as we know, in the Civil Air Patrol. In the movie, that was David Ferry, unforgettable guy in a fake wig and fake eyebrows, talking about enigmas wrapped in mysteries, wrapped in puzzles, wrapped in all kinds of things. So this is the David Ferry character that made famous in the film. And this is an actual photograph of David Ferry dressed again as a priest, as Jack Martin was. We have co-conspirators in the Kennedy assassination, as we will see, ties back to the UFO and the space program, who were involved in a strange church, a church that didn't really exist except on paper. And this is the church, the American Orthodox Catholic Church. If you review the FBI files, all of the investigations that were undertaken for the Warren Commission, and later by the House Subcommittee in the 1970s, this name will keep coming up, and no one does any background check on it. No one goes any further. Members of this church included a man called Profeta, we'll get to him in a second, David Ferry, Jack Martin, a man called Carl Stanley, who was mentioned in the FBI files, Tommy Jude Baumler, Thomas Beckham. These are all names familiar to researchers in the Kennedy assassination. They were all members of this church, most of whom were bishops in the church. The church had a lot of bishops, not many priests, and no congregations. Seriously, just bishops, no priests, no congregations. Rarely did they have a building. This photograph was taken in the only building I ever knew that housed the American Orthodox Catholic Church in the Bronx, where I'm from. And I knew the church personally. I knew these individuals personally. I knew this guy right here. That's Profeta, the guy who created the church. I knew him. And I was a member briefly of this group because I lived practically next door. And there's a long story. I won't get to it now. I won't bore you with it. But the other names on this list are extremely important. Ferry and Martin, we already know, involved in the Kennedy assassination conspiracy, at least according to Jim Garrison. Tommy Jude Baumler was a lawyer in New Orleans. And his claim to fame, as we found out only about a year ago, was that he was the man who incorporated another church, this one called the Process Church of the Final Resurrection, of the Final Judgment, rather, Process Church of the Final Judgment. This was the group that was implicated, rightly or wrongly, in the Charles Manson family, in possibly the Bobby Kennedy assassination. It goes on and on. There are all these churches that swim underneath the radar that have connections to intelligence agencies, the military, and as we will see, to the space program. This was Profeta. I knew this guy personally, a Ukrainian Orthodox priest who left the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to create this church of his own, the American Orthodox Catholic Church. He was picked by Thomas Dewey as the White House chaplain. There was an election between Harry Truman and Thomas Dewey. Everyone thought Dewey would win. Dewey was the Republican. Truman was the Democrat. Truman won by a narrow margin, and Profeta once showed me the letter that he got from Thomas Dewey appointing him as White House chaplain when Dewey thought he had won the election. This is how politically prominent and important he was. On the board of directors of the American Orthodox Catholic Church was J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the FBI, the man who gave us the X-Files and Guy Bannister and all the rest. J. Edgar Hoover was a member and on the board of directors of this phony church. Another member was Christopher Maria Stanley. He's now known as Saint Christopher Stanley. He was canonized by the guy who took over when he died. Close associate of all these guys. Ferry Martin tried to implicate him in the Kennedy assassination. He tried to implicate them in the Kennedy assassination. When Profeta had created the American Orthodox Catholic Church, he summoned all the other bishops who had been bishops with him in this church to go to New York and present their bona fides, their bona fides, their credentials to him and to Hoover. The only one who obeyed this was Carl Stanley, Christopher Maria Stanley. Christopher Stanley goes to New York, he goes to Profeta, he signs on, he goes back to his home in Kentucky, he's dead less than a month later, and only 2 weeks after the death of David Ferry, the mysterious death of David Ferry, another bishop in the same church. Suddenly the bishops of this church were all being killed. They were all dying under mysterious circumstances, all within a few weeks of each other. This story you have not heard before, because no one knows what to do with the material. No one knows what to do with this information. So when it comes to churches and guys in funny hats, you know, there's some degree of mystery out there and confusion. This is the organization as I, over the years, uncovered it, starting with our friend Profeta over there, to Christopher Stanley, to David Ferry, to Jack Martin. These were all guys implicated in the Kennedy assassination, and they all wore funny hats. The connection was this, another funny hat, that's J. Edgar Hoover in his Masonic Shriner fez, because he was a Freemason, I think we all know. So there's J. Edgar Hoover, to Guy Bannister, the guy who investigated the UFOs in 1947, the guy who was writing up all these telexes and letters, headline SM-X file, UFO sighting here, UFO sighting there. Down here is Fred Krisman. He was the guy that Bannister was allegedly investigating. And next to Krisman, there's Profeta again. Profeta, who was on the same board of directors of a church as J. Edgar Hoover. All these people working in concert, all these people working together, a phony church, mysterious goings on, and really weird hats. So what does all this have to do with the space program? You're sitting there thinking, okay, this is all very strange, but what are we here for? Well, let's fall back a little bit. We'll start to see the threads come together. In the United States, the space race began on Halloween 1936. And you're looking at this charming group of individuals down there, relaxing in front of a rocket. These were America's first rocket scientists. People like Jack Parsons, Theodore von Karman, and this is the launch at Arroyo Seco in California on October 31st, 1936. The very first launching of a rocket by American space engineers. Jack Parsons has a crater on the moon named after him. Jack Parsons was a co-founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, at Caltech in California. When you watch the space shuttle launches or you read anything about it, you'll always come across JPL all the time. He was a co-founder of JPL. Crater on the moon named after him. Solved a lot of issues regarding solid fuel storage of rocket material. At the same time, he was a follower of Aleister Crowley, the Aleister Crowley, the infamous magician who created his own cult, his own religion. Parsons himself, at the same time he's working on rockets for the US military, he's also conducting rituals in the desert, trying to summon angels and demons. I'm not making this stuff up, in case you're wondering. One of his co-workers, one of his partners in his ritual working, ritual magic, was L. Ron Hubbard, the man who later went on to found Scientology. Hubbard stole Jack Parsons' money, stole Jack Parsons' girlfriend, ran to Miami and bought a boat. In later years, Hubbard would speak very fondly of Aleister Crowley, claiming he had met him. He never did. Crowley died in 1947, before Hubbard had even actually heard of him. But Parsons was investigated by the FBI as a security risk because he was involved in occult workings. Well, just as he's getting ready to leave the United States through all the pressure of the FBI investigations, there's a mysterious explosion at his home. He dies under very mysterious circumstances. The house literally blows up with him in it. Theodore von Karman was the leader of the group that founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Come on, you fucking
He
bitch.
has a crater on the moon named after him. Born in Hungary, studied in Germany. He was a brilliant rocket scientist as well. And he formed the Jet Propulsion Laboratory with a couple of other people, Frank, Molina, and of course Parsons,
faggot, you faggot.
Foreman, and a Chinese scientist, another brilliant man.
God damn it.
Tian Sun goes on to later fame in another area of rocket science and space science.
Fuck you.
So von Karman was a guy shown here, by the way, with a Nazi scientist down here. This is Tian up here.
Dude, how do you get to the stupid Google fucking dumb shit?
Von Karman had known before in Germany and was instrumental in getting him to come to the United States to work on
Stupid ass dumb faggot.
Tian was the man they sent to debrief Werner von Braun. Werner von Braun, of course, was the Nazi scientist that was brought to the United States under something called paperclip. Werner von Braun, we'll get into in more detail just in a few minutes. But Tian was also investigated by the FBI. Everybody involved in the rocket program in the United States wound up.
I thought I was already doing this dumbass shit.
He eventually got so sick and tired, he defected to China after all of the harassment he had been by the FBI. And what happened? He develops China's space program. He creates the Silkworm missile that was used to such effect during the first Iraq invasion. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and all of that, he was sending Scud missiles and all of this. The Silkworms were in use there in the Middle East. So Tian, starting as a patriotic American citizen helping with the space program, through all the suppression by FBI, all the harassment, gives up basically, back to China, and becomes a hero in China. Develops, jumpstarts the Chinese space program. When we're talking today about the space race and the space programs, as we'll be getting into with the other speakers, keep in mind the fact that it began in two important places. It began in Germany with the rocket systems and the rocket development in Germany at Peenemünde, Nordhausen, which we'll get into in a second.
Dude, what the
But
fuck,
it also started
bro?
in the United States. And the reason that China is launching rockets today and launching satellites is because of this man, who could have been part of our space program for the rest of his life, and instead, because of all sorts of political nonsense, wound up going to China and giving them a space program almost complete. At the same time in Germany, in the same year, almost the same month, 1936, we have Fritz Goslau of the Argus company. He begins work on remote-controlled aircraft. And a few years later, December of 1942, we have the first launch, successful launch of the V-1. You've been following History Channel stuff about World War II and the Blitz and all of that. You'll know about the V-1s, the devastating effect that they had. This is a picture of the V-1 at the time. Another one. Later termed the world's first.
Oh my god, dude.
These were launched from aircraft. Dropped the air. The V-1 would drop from a plane and then go on its way. Aimed at London, of course, and later, as we know, at Antwerp. Devastating weapon, resulting in almost 23,000 civilian deaths at the time. But at the same time, back in 1941, we have the first jet-assisted takeoff launch in California by the von Karman group. Jack Parsons is here. We have Jack Parsons right here watching the takeoff of the first jet-assisted takeoff plane, a jet-powered plane. So here we have the rocket scientist who's also an occultist and a follower of Aleister Crowley and a member of all kinds of other occult organizations involved in these important events of the rocket program. In 1944, of course, we have the V-2. The Germans launched the V-2.
Okay, fuck you.
Actually, more people were killed making the V-2 than were killed by the V-2 because of slave labor in Germany and because of the concentration camp labor that was brought to Nordhausen and later to Mittelbau-Dora concentration camps and the factories attached to Buchenwald. More people were actually killed making these V-2s than were actually killed in suffering under them. So the Nazi rocket program, as we know, it started at Peenemünde, was later relocated, and the person in charge of this was General Walter Dornberger, and his assistant was Werner von Braun. We'll get back to them in a second. Another important personality in aviation medicine this time is Dr. Hubertus Struckold. He's a man in charge of all sorts of horrendous experiments on living persons in the camps, and yet is considered the father of aviation medicine. He was brought to the United States. He was given his own institute at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, and they had a building named after him until the local Daughters of the American Revolution decided that having a building named after this guy was probably not the best message to send to our next generations of young people studying medicine, so they took the name off. People were aware that Strickland was basically a monster. We've all heard of Operation Paperclip, I think. Started as Operation Crossbow, Operation Overcast. The British were trying to get the scientists, the Russians were trying to get Nazi scientists, and the Americans had their own program, which they then later renamed as Paperclip. It wasn't just the men, the scientists they were bringing over, it was also their documentation. It was also as much machinery as they could possibly get. We are talking about hundreds of railroad cars, freight cars filled with documents and equipment and machinery. Not talking even about the hundreds at first, and then thousands of Nazi scientists that were brought to the United States. Here's a photograph of the team at Fort Bliss, Texas, Paperclip members. That's a hell of a lot of Nazi scientists. And not a single funny hat among them, I will point out. One thing that's important to remember about the space program in the United States, until 1957, it was not a civilian program. For the first 10 years, 15 years of its existence, it was a military program. There was no NASA. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration had not been created yet. So all of these people worked for the military. The rocket program was a military program. And you have to remember that's the origins of the space program, was with the Army, which later became the Army Air Force, which later became NASA. The space program went under NASA. These are supposed to be our Nazis, right? We were sold a bill of goods. I mean, the United States was told us, oh, these people are not really Nazis. They were Germans. They were scientists. They were helping out. They were working for us. They really weren't believers. Yeah, right. Why then, if this is so, did we bring the best of the brightest to the United States, give them whatever they wanted, all the resources that they wanted, whatever they needed, whatever they asked for? And the Soviet Union was the first country to launch a satellite into space. If they were really working for the United States and they had become born-again American patriots and card-carrying Republicans, yes, Republicans, how did it happen that we didn't get a rocket into space, we didn't get a satellite into space, that the Russians were the first? Well, what happened? Weren't they sabotaging our space program since the very beginning? These are the true believers. This is just a handful of the people you'll come across when you research this. Walter Dornberger later becomes the head of NASA. Later gets a board position with Bell Aerospace in the United States. Is considered a rabid Nazi by military intelligence officials who are doing background checks in Germany. They've got witness statements, they've got documents, they've got everything they need to put Dornberger in jail for the rest of his life. Those documents are buried. Werner von Braun was an SS major. There are photographs of Werner von Braun in an SS uniform. The SS was not the Rotary. It was not the Boy Scouts. You didn't just, kind of join the SS because it would further your career. No, that didn't work that way. In order to join the SS, you had to prove your racial purity, going back to the year 1750. There had to be no Untermenschen in your background, right? No Jews, no Gypsies, no Slavs, no Democrats. Nobody like that in the background of your racial purity. You had to prove this, and you had to maintain a certain degree of involvement with the SS all the time. The SS was a pagan cult. The SS forbade mention of Christian holidays, even in their documentation. The SS was extremely pagan, was extremely anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, anti-everything else. If you had a rank of major in the SS, you did not get that automatically. You got that because you proved yourself. And Werner von Braun was proven later to have been involved in meetings discussing slave labor requirements for the rocket systems at Peenemünde and also at Mittelbau. He was involved in these discussions. He knew about the killings of prisoners, the torture of prisoners. He was involved in all of that. It didn't matter to Werner von Braun. At the same time that he's working for us, we bring him over under paperclip. He's now in the United States. What is he doing? He's sending classified materials out of the country to his comrades back in Germany. We know this as part of the documentation, as part of the record now. These files have been declassified. Werner von Braun was working against the United States almost from the beginning. This is a scandal, you know. But yet we consider him the father of the American space program. I mean, he's the one who got us to the moon, right? Kurt Davis was the first director of the Kennedy Space Center, the first director of the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral in Florida. He was a member of the SS and the SA, the Sturmbannteile, right, the brown shirts, the stormtroopers, two other Nazi organizations. This is the man who turned in his friends and co-workers to the Gestapo if they made disloyal remarks. This was a true believer, once again. As I say, he was an SS officer. The Allies considered the SS a criminal organization for very good reason. And yet, we put this guy in charge of the Kennedy Space Center. Theodor Zobel, another scientist, performed experiments on prisoners in the wind tunnel experiments. We brought him over, he worked for us. Hubertus Strückel, as I mentioned, tortured prisoners, killed people just for experiments, dumped them into freezing cold water to see how long they would survive, stuff like that. Jumpstarts the Aviation Medicine Institute at Randolph Air Force Base. George Rickey, very famous Nazi, murdered prisoners personally murdered them at the Middle Baldora site. Right, was given positions with American corporations in the United States. Emil Salmon worked as an engineer at Wright-Patterson, as you can see. He torched a synagogue. Heinz Gizike, a rocket engineer. His family in the United States during the war was spying for the Nazis. He was fine, he was okay. Denazified. Otto Ambros, we've all heard of Otto Ambros probably. Executive at IG Farben. This is the guy involved in administering the experiments in Zyklon B, the gas that was used in the death camps. He gets a job with W.R. Grace and Company. Leonard Alberts gets a job with the Bechtel Corporation. All big American corporations, all very important members of the military industrial complex. His co-workers hated it, that he was just too Nazi even for them, and some of them were Nazis. Didn't hurt him at all. They moved him from position to position, but they kept him on. In May 29, 1947, to give you an idea of how badly the Nazi paperclip scientists were sabotaging the American space program, the United States attacked Mexico with a missile. A missile, this one, the Hermes missile, based on the V-2 design, was launched by German scientists at White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico. It went up and then it took a right. And it wound up in Juarez, Mexico, just outside of a heavily populated area. Hit the ground, blew a crater 15 meters across. We actually bombed Mexico with a missile in 1947. The Mexican government was not amused. You know, it's like, you know, we have people going across the border this way, you're sending missiles this way, what's up? Well, the Germans in charge of this had sabotaged the guidance system so that it wouldn't go where it was supposed to go. And
Got your bone? Yeah. Still there? All right. Work on that. Work on that. Get it going. Yeah. All right.
American engineers who were responsible for some of these experiments were complaining like mad to the Pentagon, saying that these guys are nuts. You know, they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. They are not really on our side. Well, we're going to now move into another area. But just for a second, we think about this situation, this scenario. We had German scientists working for us, stationed at military bases in the United States, who were totally unmonitored. They could leave the base at any time. They would go walking through town. They opened up mailboxes. They were receiving mail from Europe. They were sending mail out to Europe. A lot of it went to Eastern Europe because they had colleagues who had been taken by the Soviets in order to help their German scientists, Nazi scientist colleagues in the Soviet Union and in the Eastern Bloc. They were sending American blueprints over to Eastern Germany, and to Russia. At the same time, they're working in the United States. These records have since been declassified, not all of them. I mean, God forbid we should declassify records that are 60 years old from World War II, right? You know, you're wondering right now, is there a secret space program? Well, there was a secret space program in the 1940s, for sure. There was a secret space program in the 1950s. We didn't know what was going on. As an American growing up with the threat constantly of the atomic bomb, and, you know, the Russians were going to bomb us and we were all going to die, and I had to hide my head under a desk because that would save me. Growing up with this, we thought that Werner von Braun was a good German. He was not a Nazi, he was on our side. Only in the last few years, have we been able to find out that these guys had never been really on our side. They were true believers in their cause. The Nazi Party was not just a political party. You know, it was not Republicans and Democrats like we have in the States. It was not people concerned about if we're going to have an ordinance for running a cable line or water or sewer. They cared nothing about that. The Nazi Party was a cult of true believers. Just because they lost the war doesn't mean they lost their true faith. So they maintained it through thick and thin. They looked down on their captors in the United States. To them, it was a toss-up. Do we go to Russia? Do we go to the United States? There was no ideological choice being made. It was strictly a pragmatic one. Where are we going to get the best deal? You know, they were operating on their own. They were operating with their own agenda. So in 1947, we have the Cold War. First, we bombed Mexico, and we apologize for that later. Then we have the Kenneth Arnold sighting. We have the Maury Island affair. We have famously Roswell. In 1947, that same year, the CIA is created. The Department of the Air Force is created. A year later, Truman defeats Dewey. I mention this because of the relationship to other incidents that we're talking about. In 1950, the Korea War begins. Okay, so now we're in Cold War mode. Russians have poured across the border to North Korea. Okay, the brainwashing thing starts. Everybody's freaking out about the weird science the Russians are using to brainwash American soldiers. Okay, a person very involved in this, in all the hysteria around this, in 1952, holds a seance in a farmhouse in Maine. The man is, no, not the Pope, not the funny hat guy, the other guy, Andrija Puharich. Andrija Puharich was a medical doctor, he was an inventor, he was a military man, a captain in the army, stationed at Camp Detrick, later Fort Detrick, Edgewood Arsenal later, he was stationed at. This is the area of the United States military that's involved with chemical and biological weapons. Puharich, however, was involved in trying to weaponize paranormal abilities. Puharich's focus in 1952, as early as 1952, is how can we use ESP, telepathy, all these things, in a military capacity. Since now we're facing a Cold War with people who use brainwashing methods, Puharich suddenly becomes a hot ticket item. He's talking about using the human brain and the powers of the brain to do all sorts of horrible things to people. He brings together 9 people in a seance. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you realize who these people are. One of them is Arthur Young. Some of you may have heard of Arthur Young. He wrote a lot of very well-received books, The Reflexive Universe, The Geometry of Meaning. Arthur Young was a great guy. He was the inventor of the Bell helicopter. He sold his rights and all of that. He left engineering, military development at the end of World War II. In order to pursue full-time his interest in the paranormal, he studied yoga, Eastern religions, ESP, psychokinesis, astrology, you name it, he was into it, Arthur Young. His wife, Ruth Forbes Payne Young, she was also at the seance. So we have Arthur Young, the inventor of the Bell helicopter, the guy who created the Bell helicopter along with Larry Bell, his partner. We have his wife, the excessively nomenclatured Ruth Forbes Payne Young. That's all her husband. So she's married first to a Forbes. John Kerry, our presidential candidate, was a Forbes. It's a very old, very famous family. She was married to George Lyman Payne. Payne was a direct descendant of one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and related, coincidentally, to an actor called Robert Treat Payne. Long story. But anyway, Ruth Forbes, also married to a Payne, also married to Arthur Young. Kind of at the same time, one after the other. She has a son, Michael Payne, who then gets a job at Bell Aerospace through Arthur Young's influence, because Arthur Young helped create the company. Her son needs a job. He gets him a job at Bell Aerospace in Texas. Her best friend is Mary Bancroft. Mary Bancroft was the longtime mistress of Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles, as you know, was the famous head of the CIA, the one that Jack Kennedy fired over the Bay of Pigs when he told Dulles he was going to split the CIA into 1 million pieces. Allen Dulles was the one who was fired by Kennedy and who later wound up on the Warren Commission investigating Kennedy's death. Very conveniently. So these are two people, 2 of the 9. So Michael Payne's boss, right? The boss of Michael Payne, Arthur Young's son-in-law, is none other than General Walter Dornberger. And he's shown here. That's Dornberger over here, and that's Himmler over here. And they all got hats. So these are all guys. So Michael Payne has these direct connections right back to Paperclip, back to the space program. Michael Payne's wife is also named Ruth. She's Ruth Payne. Ruth Payne is a Quaker. She likes folk dancing, walks on the beach, candlelit dinner, and the Russian language. Allegedly, she's studying Russian. That's Ruth Payne. That's Michael and Ruth in Irving, Texas. That's Ruth Payne again. She's sitting way over on the left. Here is a woman called Marguerite Oswald. Here is Marina Oswald. The picture was taken on November 22nd, 1963, the day that Kennedy was assassinated. That evening, they're photographed in Ruth Payne's living room in Irving, Texas. It was Ruth Payne who got Lee Harvey Oswald a job at the Texas School Book Depository, right on the route where he would be able to assassinate the president. That's Ruth Payne. Ruth Payne had visited Arthur Young and her mother-in-law, Ruth Forbes Payne Young, in Philadelphia in September of 1963. She had Marina Oswald, this Russian defector, the wife of Lee Harvey Oswald, and her children living with her in her house. What was she talking about to Arthur Young, I wonder? Did she ever mention the fact that, hey, I got this Russian defector and his wife living with me in Irving, Texas, Lee Oswald? Maybe you heard of him. He was a Marine. He defected to the Soviet Union, wanting to become a Russian citizen. He redefected back to the United States. He did all of this, and the guy's still only 24 years old. That's pretty good for a 24-year-old. A Marine, somebody involved in the Atsugi Air Base, a radar technician, a guy who spoke Russian fluently enough that his Russian-born wife thought he was Russian. Now, I don't know about you. I studied a lot of languages in my time. I mean, Mandarin, Spanish, French, Italian. I've done a lot of languages. I've studied Russian. Russian is a damn hard language to learn. And yet this young kid, with hardly any formal education, just barely got out of high school, joins the Marines and learns to speak fluent Russian like that. So much that he can convince Marina that he's fluent, that he's native Russian. So Marina Oswald, the niece of the KGB, an NKVD, an Army Military Intelligence officer, marries Lee Harvey Oswald, this Marine defector, very famous defector. Then they decide to go back to the United States. Ruth Payne wants to learn Russian. That's her story. Oh, I'd love to learn Russian from Marina Oswald. So She gives her some room in her house because they're broken. And then Lee goes to Texas. Well, the rest was history. So here's the 9. Here's the connection of these 9 people. I didn't mention all the people of the 9. We'll get to that, but they're mostly DuPonts, Astors, Forbes, etc. These are the wealthiest families in the United States at the time, blue blood Americans with long pedigrees going back to the Mayflower or to the Declaration of Independence in some cases. Representatives of these families were at this bizarre seance. And during this seance, in Maine, they were contacted, according to all the published documentation. I'm not making this stuff up, and I'm not speculating. Puharich himself published this documentation, saying that aliens, a group of 9, contacted the group of 9 who were at the seance and said, "We are 9, you are 9. We're giving you the mission, to help transform life on the planet." And what was their first major contribution was, having to do with the assassination of President Kennedy. So this 9 to me is very strange. We have to ask ourselves a lot of questions. Did that somehow promote, evolution on this planet, or did that do just the opposite? So there's Arthur Young. There's his daughter-in-law, Ruth Paine, Lee Harvey Oswald to Kennedy. The connections are very tight. And another member of the 9, of course, was an Astor, as I mentioned, Alice Muriel Astor. So all American aristocracy. September 12, 1962, Kennedy makes his famous, "We shall go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." The last time an American president talked to Americans this way. We're going to do things not because they're easy, because they're hard, because that's what we're going to do. He told Congress of the moon mission May 25, 1961. In September 62, over a year later, he reiterates this in a very famous speech. You can catch it on YouTube, it's everywhere. Very brilliant, very passionate speech about what we're going to do. And then, of course, in November of the following year, he's assassinated. What does all this have to do with what we're talking about? Okay, in New Orleans, before the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald gets a job with the William Riley Coffee Company. The coffee company still exists. He went down there to get a job. He worked for a short time. He quits. He tells a co-worker, "Hey, I've just found a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow," according to the quotation. He's getting a job at NASA. Well, in 1957, we didn't send up, the Russians sent up a Sputnik, and that scared the hell out of the American military establishment. It scared the hell out of the American people. They said, "We have all these Nazi scientists, what are we getting for our, what bang for the buck are we getting here? So we have to do something about this." And so they put the fear of God into the Nazi scientists and said, "Okay, listen guys, enough is enough. We've fooled around enough. Now we have to actually do something." And so the government took control of the space program away from the military and gave it to a civilian organization, NASA. The problem with that was they moved the Nazi scientists from the military to NASA. So it was a change in name only. Suddenly you have military scientists who were Nazis, who were true believers. Now they're working for a civilian agency for NASA under the U.S. government. We didn't really change anything. Direct military control was lost, but the Nazis were still in command. After the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald leaves the William Riley Coffee Company. He never does work for NASA, although we find out that he was probably working out of an office at the NASA site that was a deployment agency for the CIA. This is something that's also come up recently. Anyway, he leaves William Riley. He leaves New Orleans, goes to Texas. After the assassination, his co-workers also all get jobs at NASA. They're coffee company clerks, and they got jobs at NASA. As I mentioned, Ruth Paine had visited his wife, visited Arthur Young and his wife. Arthur Young believes, or he's being told, that he's been in contact with these 9 supernatural beings. Andrea Puharich, the guy who organizes this, the captain in the army involved in weaponizing the paranormal, he's the guy who discovers Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic who bends spoons by looking at them. He brings Uri Geller to the United States. He gets him involved with the Sanford Research Institute, run by Scientologists, as it turns out. All this other stuff is going on. Uri Geller eventually says he got tired of it. He thought that he was being run by Puharich as an intelligence asset. He really felt that Puharich was an intelligence agent running him as an agent for one of the intelligence agencies. But part of that program was that he felt from time to time he was being put in contact with extraterrestrial beings. Geller was mystified by what was going on in his brain by all of this. Now, whether you think about Uri Geller as being genuine or not, or a player or not, or whatever, Geller is pretty open and honest about his relationship with Buharic. He didn't like him, he distrusted him, and eventually cut off relations with him. As I said, Ruth Bain finds Lee the job at the Texas School Repository. So then in New Orleans, after the assassination, Garrison remembers David Ferry, Jack Martin, all these guys, Guy Bannister. He conducts his own investigation, and he finds that all of these guys were bishops in a church, except for Guy Bannister, who was like the Pope or something, of the Vatican in New Orleans. And then Guy Bannister and Fred Krisman were the guys who jump-started the UFO thing in 1947 after Kenneth Arnold. So he calls in Fred Krisman. Guy Bannister is dead. He died in 1964, again, mysteriously. So Fred Krisman then is called in, he's interrogated. Nothing much comes of that. So what was the secret space program, from my point of view, from the 1940s? We bring in Nazi scientists to the United States. In 1947, we have the famous Roswell incident. The Roswell debris, we know, is taken to Wright Air Force Base, or eventually Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Wright Field at the time, which is the same place where we bring Walter Dornberger, Werner von Braun, and everybody else preliminarily. We bring them all together. All these guys are together in 1947 in one place. At the same time, we have all these UFO sightings. We have Nazi scientists in the space program. We're afraid the Russians have the bomb. As it turns out, a lot of people had the bomb in those days. We have a group of wealthy Americans, all involved in the militarization of the paranormal. And they make this contact with this extraterrestrial group called the Nine. I wrote a book called Sinister Forces. The very first volume is called The Nine. And it focuses on this strange connections. We have this family, this group of families having a seance in 1952 in Maine, talking to aliens in a spaceship hovering over the earth, they say. And then later we find tendrils leading out from that seance directly to the Kennedy assassination, among other things. But the Kennedy assassination being the most important and the most obvious one. If you follow the Kennedy assassination, you may know of a guy called George Morenshield. He was a Russian CIA contract agent, eventually helped in some way Lee Harvey Oswald and Marina. He was involved with them. He commits suicide before he has to give an interview about all of this. In his book, his notebook, his address book when he was, after he was found dead, was the phone number of a man who was also involved with the Nine. I mean, Lee Harvey Oswald was surrounded by so many bishops and so many members of the Nine, the poor guy had no chance. I mean, he was basically surrounded by people who all felt they had some sort of mysterious mission. And Lee Harvey Oswald was the guy in the middle. Oswald himself didn't have much of a connection this way. Connection to military intelligence, probably. That fluency in Russian should tip you off right away in those days. But the rest of the connections to the Nine, to the assassinations before and since, are incredible. They're astonishing. We know the CIA was blamed for the Kennedy assassination. We've all heard the stories. What we don't really remember is that the CIA at that time not only was involved in protecting Nazi scientists as much as they could, and other Nazis around the world, Nazi war criminals, involved with the Vatican, as I think you've all heard. I'm working on a story right now that I hope I'll be able to publish by the end of the year, involving the monastery route, which the Catholic Church really deliberately helped a lot of very famous, very prominent Nazi war criminals escape. Gave them Vatican passports, safe houses. Some of the story you've heard already before. But what we don't really realize, the CIA, at the time of the assassination, for instance, was heavily involved with another Nazi organization, the Gay-Left organization, which was running agents for the CIA in Eastern Europe and against the Soviet Union. Again, just like in Paperclip, these Nazi scientists were not really working for us. They were taking our money, they were giving us phony reports. They were virtually useless against the Soviet Union. As it turns out, years later, as we find out, when all the chips are in, and all the information is there, we find out they've been sabotaging us as well. Alan Dulles was protecting Nazi war criminals since before the war ended. We know that in transcripts of speeches and talks that he had with famous Nazi leaders going back to 1944 and 1945. And the fascinating thing about Alan Dulles, bringing all of these pieces of these disparate things together, was that he was Mary Bancroft's mistress. Okay, Mary Bancroft was the friend of Ruth Forbes Payne Young. During the Warren Commission interviews with witnesses, and you can read this in the Warren Commission transcript, look for Ruth Payne. Read her, she appeared twice before the commission, talking about what she was doing in the days and weeks and months leading up to the assassination, how she knew Lee and Marina Oswald, all of these questions. Alan Dulles is part of that committee. He's sitting in. At the point where Ruth Payne starts to talk about her trip to Philadelphia to meet Arthur Young, 2 months before the assassination, 3 months before the assassination, Alan Dulles cuts her off and changes the subject. He does not allow her to finish the story. Read the transcript for yourself, you'll see it. It's blatant. Alan Dulles has been quiet the entire time. Suddenly jumps in, like a defense attorney, and then suddenly says, oh no, we're not, let's talk about this instead. As she's about to say who she met, who she was dealing with, Alan Dulles changes the subject, changes the story. Her information about Arthur Young never makes it into the record, and she hasn't talked about it since. What was going on? Alan Dulles knew Mary Bancroft. Mary Bancroft was Ruth Forbes Payne Young's best friend. There was a very deep connection there. Alan Dulles knew ahead of time, he had to, about Lee Oswald, Ruth Payne, Marina Oswald, and all of this. And he was desperate to cover up that part and make sure it never made it into the record of the Warren Commission. So we have a lot of wild stuff going on, including the fact that Ruth Payne's husband, Michael Payne, was working for Bell Aerospace. So what do we have? We have a Garrison investigation alleging there was a conspiracy in the Kennedy assassination. The problem with Garrison trying to prove all of this is that he had a cast of characters nobody would believe, right? He had Clay Shaw, who was an unbelievable character on his own, the man that he was trying for the assassination. But he also had all these other characters. He had all these bishops, He didn't know what to do with these bishops. He couldn't understand that the bishops were a front for an intelligence operation. He suspected it, but he didn't know where to go with it. Paranormal researchers, UFO personalities like Guy Bannister, like Fred Krisman, and of course employees of NASA. All of these people can be tied back to Paperclip, can be tied back to the Nazi space program, the people that we brought over. This was all part of the problem. This was all part of what happened. Secrets were kept. There are still classified documents of the Kennedy assassination. We know that thousands of documents have yet to be declassified. Thousands of documents on World War II. Thousands of documents on the Admiral Byrd expedition to Antarctica. Right? We've classified so much in the United States alone. Now think of your own countries. I did a lot of work in Latin America. People who know that I was in Chile in 1979, researching the Nazi influence down there and trying to find out information about Nazi technology that had been smuggled to South America. Under military dictatorships in Latin America, of course, there was no information. Secrecy was the order of the day. Documents were classified, shredded, burned. Things went on for 20, 30 years in Latin America, we'll never know. And yet, many of our Nazis wound up there, in Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Uruguay, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, everywhere. There were Nazis in hiding, all of these places. They were scientists, they were SS officers, they brought technology, they brought money, vast sums of money under Otto Skorzeny. All of this was being brought and developed into programs. Perón used to brag about his own space program, developing a new jet system, a new faster than speed of light kind of thing that he was talking about and bragging about, because he knew he had Nazi scientists there working for him. The author Joseph Farrell, very good researcher, has written about the Bell, has written about alternative sources of energy that were being developed by Nazi scientists in South America, in Bariloche, very close to where I was detained in Chile, on the other side of that border. So there's a lot of secrecy yet. We know history, only the declassified portions of history. The world that we know is based upon what we've been told. We can read books about history and feel that we know what's going on. But I can tell you, the The history of the last 100 years is largely still classified. We live in a kind of dream world, thinking that we know what actually happened. Right now, there's information that the Japanese had detonated an atomic device in August of 1945 off the coast of Korea. And there are Japanese intelligence officers who come forward with the story who are insisting that it took place. If that's true, we have to rewrite the end of World War II, right? Then we have to go back and say, wait a minute, what really happened? If we talk about paperclip, the way I was taught in school in the 1950s and 60s was that the Nazis these were good Germans. Werner von Braun was never a Nazi. Dornberger was never a Nazi. All these guys were on our side. So it turns out it wasn't true. It turns out they were sabotaging us every step of the way. Our space program was the result of Nazis trying to stonewall us and to prevent us from getting there, until eventually, after Sputnik, they were told, you better do it or get out. So that's what happened. We sold our soul in the United States, and not just the United States, other countries as well, including the Soviet Union. We sold our soul for this technology. We dealt with some of the worst war criminals in history. Not just even the Holocaust, but the idea that they had slave labor that they worked to death and replaced with other slave laborers. And these people who employed these slave laborers deliberately, who were involved in every step of that process, including the killing of these laborers also, were the people that we brought over for the space program. Our space program has its origins in people, on the one hand, like Jack Parsons, who once wrote that he was the Antichrist. He was a brilliant man, but he believed he was the Antichrist and was ushering in a new age of witchcraft, according to him. And he was a follower of Crowley and member of the Ordo Templi Orientis and all of this. A very brilliant guy, but a very strange guy, on the one hand, and we had the Nazis on the other. These were the people that were jump-starting the space program of the United States, starting in 1936 and going up until the moon launch. So we have to go back and relook at this history and ask ourselves why. Why was it so necessary? Why was the space program militarily necessary? Why did they work for the Army? Why did they sabotage the process as much as they could? Why did the Army allow Nazi scientists to wander off the base and do whatever they wanted to do, communicate with whomever they wanted to? Fort Bliss, Texas, is on the border of Texas and Mexico. That region in the 1940s was like Vienna during the Cold War. It was a place where spies hung out with spies. It was rife with all sorts of intelligence activity. All sorts of things were going on in that border area. All the way from the California-Mexico border, all the way from Texas, all the way to Brownsville. There was a lot of cross-border traffic. A lot of very strange individuals crossed that border. A lot of military people, a lot of intelligence people. The Nazis were still running spies after the end of the war because they were protecting Nazi assets. They were protecting SS officers who were making their way into the United States from Latin America, and people making their way from the States into places like Argentina, being paid for by Nazi gold. So we have to reevaluate the history of the world since 1945. If we have to go back and look at it again, if we want to know what happened, what's going on with the space program, and about breakaway civilizations, about motivations to create a space program for the rich and the powerful, we have to go back to this period of time. We have to understand why it was that we could deal with the Nazis so easily, why it was we thought that was the best thing that we could do, why we gave them carte blanche, allowed them to do whatever they wanted to do, why we bent over backwards for these guys, murderers. Some of them wound up in positions of tremendous influence in South America. Klaus Barbie became head of the secret police in Bolivia, an official government position. At the same time, he's running drugs, guns, and assassinating communist leaders, socialist leaders, or anybody he didn't like, not only in South America, but in Europe. There were assassinations taking place in Spain, in France, in Germany, on the orders of people like Barbie and Operation Condor in South America. This is all part of our history. These are not footnotes. We're being told they're footnotes. We're being told it's not central to what actually happened. I tell you, though, that's not true. As anyone who knows and traveled in those countries knows, the stranglehold that the Nazis and the Germans in general, but the Nazis specifically had on the economies of those countries, on the culture of many of those areas, was incredible. And in some cases still is. So, who benefited, right? Civilian control of NASA began in 1957. The Nazi scientists remained in place. They were there at the very beginning of the UFO era. Many people believe the Nazis had developed the very first prototypes of the flying saucer, of wingless aircraft, of alternate energy, of the atomic bomb. The Luftwaffe had a map of Manhattan in which they were trying to estimate the damage an atomic bomb would have and how many people would be killed. This map was developed in 1943. You know, we know the evidence is there. We just have to keep looking. Something else was going on. What they told us was not the way it happened. And now, my fear is, in the United States, because we have the Patriot Act, and because we have all sorts of ways to stifle inquiry, to stop information from getting out, more secrets can be kept, more programs can be instituted about which we will know nothing until it's too late. Kennedy was perceived as a threat to the program. He had signed treaties with the Soviets, promised not to invade Cuba. This was against the Nazi ideology. This was contrary to a Nazi platform, not an American platform. Kennedy was a very popular president, you know. But his idea of cutting a deal with the Soviets and essentially saving the world from thermonuclear war in 1962 was disregarded because many in the military thought we should have gone to war. The Nazi right-wing coalition is very strong. In the United States, it still is. If you look at who finances and who helps certain political parties in the United States, you're going to find a tremendous support from Nazi and neo-Nazi organizations for that political party. One party in particular, not the other. So you're going to ask yourself, well, what is all this about? Reagan, President Reagan, of course, was heavily supported by something called the World Anti-Communist League. The World Anti-Communist League was populated almost entirely by Nazis, former Nazi officers, former people that worked against the Soviets, working for Nazi dictatorships, and they were incredible stuff because they were true believers. George Patton famously said we were pointing our guns in the wrong direction when we went after the Nazis. We should have gone after the Soviets. There's a lot that we could talk about, and I don't have the time. I don't know. How am I going for time?
Yeah, it's a bummer. Come here. Come here. Up, come here. Come here. Up.
I'll just keep talking until you tell me to stop. Okay. Really? Oh, cool. Okay. In that case, pause that refreshes. Here's the question I want to ask. What more was there at stake? Why was Kennedy killed? It had to be for some really big reason. It couldn't be because they didn't like his hair, you know. It had to be for something really specific and something big, something major, something that was going to affect the economy and the political structure, power structures that existed. Did Kennedy's insistence on going to the moon rob other projects of finances and resources that they needed? Was the moon a kind of chimera, a kind of quixotic dream that we should go to the moon first and show our superiority over the Soviets? Was it something that took money and power away from this inner circle of right-wing zealots, of Nazis who had a different approach to science, a different approach to the space program? People who wanted to do their own thing. And that Kennedy's insistence that we're going to put all of our money into the space program took away power from them, gave more power to NASA, but took it away from the military and took it away from other projects. So was there, in the 1960s, a secret space program? We talk a lot about the military-industrial complex. President Eisenhower warned us about that in his farewell address when he left office. And we've focused on that to a great deal, but we don't really know what it is. We know it has to do with guns and the Army. But remember that the military also was developing rockets, jet propulsion, various types of missiles. NASA was solely occupied with visiting other planets, according to its brief. its space science was satellites going to other planets. It was a non-military application of space technology. The military was still involved in their own aspects of space technology. And this involved missiles, it involved alternate sources of energy, it involved different types of aircraft that could fly at tremendous speeds. About 18 months ago, as an example, I was invited to participate as an observer in a meeting of former intelligence officers out in Las Vegas. Go figure. And during the course of that time that I spent there, we visited several military installations. We had to have all sorts of security checks done and all of that. And you've all heard of Area 51. Well, there was a presentation given, much like I'm giving one now, on Area 51 by one of the guys who was there, who spent his lifetime there. And he was very bitter about the fact that even the CIA could have an association where former spooks could sit down and chat and have drinks and talk about their failures or successes. But that the guys at Area 51 could not. They're still bound by secrecy laws of things that happened back in the 1950s and 1960s. You might remember the U-2 incidents. You know, the Nazis had the V-2, we had the U-2. And the U-2 was our stealth plane that took photographs of the Soviet Union, of other countries. It was a spy plane. That, of course, was developed at Area 51. That's where it was housed, that's where it was based. So all of this took place at Area 51. And Area 51, according to popular understanding, was a military installation, military base. That's not exactly true. It was an intelligence operation. It had nothing really to do directly with the military. It was an indirect relationship that was had at Area 51. So you had the development of the U-2. People, of course, always say they were back engineering, reverse engineering spacecraft or UFOs, that sort of thing. This guy would not talk about that. Of course, he poo-pooed the idea. But his presentation began with a picture of an alien and the theme song from the X-Files. Right? So he starts his presentation this way, and of course everybody laughs politely or nervously. And then he goes on to give his talk about Area 51. He says I have until 3 o'clock. Sorry. Don't worry. Oh, I've got a lot more presentations in here, believe me, we can do this all night. Sure. So he went into a lot of detail about what happened up there and how we lost more of our CIA agents in a single accident involving Area 51 than we ever lost in the field. So there was a lot going on up there, and that's still classified. He still can't really talk about it, not even to a group of former intelligence officers who had all signed secrecy oaths and everything else, and he still couldn't go into it. You know, so his presentation was rather thin, but he did talk about the YouTube programs and Francis Gary Powers and all of that, and everybody in the audience understood that when he's talking about Francis Gary Powers, the pilot of the U-2 who was shot down over the Soviet Union, we're also talking about Lee Harvey Oswald. We're also talking about Oswald's involvement with that particular part of the space program. Because Oswald was stationed, as we know, at Sugi Air Force Base in Japan, which was one of only 2 bases in the world at which the U-2 would take off from. That was the base where it was kept. So the flights from Japan went over the Soviet Union. And Oswald's job as a radar operator was in the room with the traffic controllers that were sending up the U-2s. So every time we turn around, in these major political events, we run across the space program again, in some way, shape, or form. It was insidious. It involved all sorts of aspects of American life, things that we would never expect. Why did people who worked at Riley Coffee Company all go to work for NASA? Why did Oswald claim that he was getting a job at NASA? Why did all these other spooks and all these other strange people wind up somehow with the space program and then again with the Kennedy assassination? There is something very serious going on here. There's a very strange part of American history, and by extension, in a way, of American world history that's taking place with the space program. If you look at the space programs in Europe, if you look at the space programs in China and other parts of the world, you will see all the connections going back to this one central phenomenon of the space race between the Soviet Union and the United States. And you have to ask yourself, was it really a space race? You know, politicians on both sides may have thought it was a race. Low-level politicians may have thought this. They may have been stricken with fear that we were in a race against the Russians for domination of space. We may have thought this. But the scientists on either side, I think, never had any illusions about this. There was no race. There was a cooperation. You know, someone at some point decided the Soviets can go first. They'll have their Sputnik, and they'll send a dog into space, and then eventually they will send an astronaut into space. The Russians had the first go at it. How could they possibly? When we had the creme de la creme, when we had all of the best and the brightest of the Nazi space program. How did that happen? It had to have been a cooperation between the scientists themselves. This implicates or implies that there was another level of government in the world at that time. That there was another basis of cooperation and collaboration between people that we thought were dire enemies. That there were networks of people operating throughout the world who cooperate with each other in some way, shape, or form. And this is what we have in the space program. They cooperated so much that people died, people were killed, people were assassinated. Serious investigations into the UFOs led to the deaths of a lot of people. James McDonald, famous scientist who went before Congress and insisted that UFO sightings were not the result of sightings of the planet Venus, swamp gas, or weather balloons. For this, he was ridiculed. He was later found dead. They said he committed suicide. They always say they committed suicide. It's a standard response. Murray Jessup, right, involved in the Philadelphia experiments, a researcher into UFOs and all of that, commits suicide, they say, in Miami, Florida. You know, all of these people who are seriously involved in this study, who try to promote it and try to talk reasonably about it, not wild-eyed, aluminum foil hat wearing people, you know, talking that their minds are being controlled from Venus or something. These are serious people. James McDonald was a very serious guy. He was a scientist. He was a doctor, a PhD, meteorologist. He knew what he was talking about. Dead. Jessup, a very reasonable guy, a very sort of scientific-minded guy, not the kind of wild-eyed guy who was anything that anybody ever told him. In the last month or two of his life, was extremely paranoid, extremely nervous. Felt that there was something going on, that somebody was after him, and then he wound up dead in Miami. So we have these things connected with the UFO program. Why? If the UFO phenomenon is a figment of our imaginations, if we're projecting stuff onto atmospheric conditions and we're seeing ghosts or something like that, why all this secrecy? Why all the murder? Why all the suicides? What does that have to do with just believing in 6 impossible things before breakfast? There's something very serious, something that points to people who are willing to spill blood in the furtherance of a goal or an objective. And the best example we have of that in the last 100 years has been, of course, the Nazis and the SS. People who thought that to kill huge numbers of people was justified for a kind of spiritual reason. The Nazis believed very seriously. This was not propaganda. They believed very seriously in the idea that in the blood is the spirit. They believed that your race carried a spiritual component, and that those of inferior races, quote unquote, were inferior spiritually, so it was okay to kill them. In fact, it was necessary to kill them to purify the rest of the planet, to purify the race. This was something they believed very sincerely. And they looked to American scientists who came up with this idea, something called eugenics and the race science program. So, when you have people who believe that the ends justify the means, when you have people who believe that murder is acceptable, even on a huge scale, because of the responsibility they have to jumpstart evolution, the next stage of it, and then they lose a war, do you really think they're going to go away? Do you really think they're going to say, shucks, lost the war, I guess we're all going to become Democrats? Yeah. It's not going to happen. It just won't happen. Many times I've told people the same example of Christianity. Christianity began and lived underground, in cemeteries, in catacombs, meeting secretly at night for over 300 years before it was accepted in the Roman Empire. 300 years. These people who believed in a kind of an impossible thing, a resurrected person, right? They kept on to that belief for 300 years. The Nazis lost their war in 1945, right? 65, 66 years ago. That's not a long time. Some of them are still alive. Some of these people are still alive and they're still having influence in their own countries. They're having influence as far away as Australia. They're all over the place. And as they die off, they have people who are following in their footsteps, people they've talked to, indoctrinated. They don't go away. This is a cult that does not disappear. The problem with this particular cult is that they're very well funded, and they have a lot of supporters in a lot of countries. I should say, including this country, but a lot of other countries. No one is immune. They're everywhere. Okay, and I'm not saying this out of paranoia. I'm the kind of person who generally does not behave that way or think that way, but the facts, the documents speak for themselves. The presence of Nazis and neo-Nazis in this world in general is growing. It's not going away. I travel a lot. The last 20 years especially, I've traveled to more than maybe 40, 50 countries. And I find constantly in airports, in developing nations particularly, copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, this famous hoax that was invented by the Tsarist secret police back before the Russian Revolution. I mean, they're being reprinted in local languages everywhere. Henry Ford, the American inventor who invented the assembly line for making automobiles, was a notorious anti-Semite. He was part of the origins of our military-industrial complex. His assembly line technology was used to make planes and jets and bombs and tanks and everything else. Here was a guy who was as anti-Semitic as Hitler, to whom Hitler gave the highest award that Nazi